Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today we have a very special guest to join us, and this guest, for him, this is the first time he's joining PGurus Hangout. Professor M.D. Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, welcome to PGurus channel.
Thank you.
So, Professor Nalapat, I'm going to jump straight into business, and I'm going to take you back to your interview in February of this year, wherein you said you had expressed some grave concerns about the way, the direction in which the Modi government was headed. Sir, it's now about a month since that happened. Now, a few things have changed in India's politics. How do you see things playing out? And more importantly, what do you think Prime Minister Modi needs to do?
Well, the reality of the situation is that change comes when you bring, in a complex world which is what we have now in the 21st century. You need a team which is on the same wavelength as you are, which is the same ideals as you have, which is the same determination and grit as you have, and the same basic objectives that you have. Now, I'm happy to say that here in Washington, finally, Donald Trump seems to be assembling that kind of a team. I mean, initially, possibly due to some well-intentioned but really bad advice from some of his close people, he assembled a beltway team, and which really diluted his policy very sharply and which diluted his effectiveness. Now, Trump is getting more and more into the, more confident, and he's now getting people into his team who reflect his priorities, who reflect his views. And let's not forget, these views and priorities are what he was elected to do. He was not elected to be a Hillary Clinton. He was not elected to be a Barack Obama. He was elected because he is Donald Trump. And very importantly, because people believe that this is an authentic man, that he is what he is. He's not, somebody out of a focus group or somebody who's got cue cards or who's always got some kind of a earpiece which tells him what to do from some handler behind the scenes. He is himself. Now, the problem with Prime Minister Modi was he had a clean slate, actually, in the 2014 election. He could have set up, a lot of people. I mean, Nehru used to say, I can set up lampposts, he'll get elected. Well, Modi could have set up lampposts in 2014. And the sad reality is, he has set up a lot of lampposts. Let's be honest. He has set up, most of the people who the BJP gave tickets to are frankly people who are not of the 21st century standard and who certainly are not of the standard that we associate with Modi. So, and when he chose...
I just have one clarification to ask you, Professor Nalapat. Are we talking about the members of his cabinet or the members of parliament?
We are talking about the members of parliament. Well, after all, the members of parliament will be the future cabinet. So, at that point in time, I think Modi became a very generous man. He became like Santa Claus. So, all right, you had so many people who Rajnath Singh wanted. You had so many people who Gadkari wanted. You had so many people who various other, groups which were aligned to Modi wanted. So, all these people were accommodated. All this grab bag.
I'm sorry, Nalapat ji. Is that not how most political parties function? They have some factions, and each faction has to be satisfied. Otherwise, you have incumbency or anti-incumbency, and otherwise you have these factional fights and so on and so forth.
See, I was of the view that Modi was talking about change. I quite agree. This is the way politics has been functioning for decades. But the point was, where Modi represented a change from that. And what we expected was that change. So as a consequence, what we expected was a slate of individuals who are not there because they are in multiple darbars. Now, you know very well that some of the politicians in India have got darbars. I mean, one of the most famous darbars I need not mention is Mr. Politician X, who is a minister in the Modi government with several portfolios even now. And this gentleman has got a darbar. And you have to go virtually every day to the Darbar. You have to listen to him talk about journalists and about politicians and about everything else under the sun. And then, of course, each time he says something, you have to say, "My God, this is Albert, Einstein squared." I mean, this is not just Einstein. It's way beyond Einstein. So the good news is that if you keep going to his Darbar for years and years, then what happened? You become a cabinet minister, you become a minister of state, you become a high official in the Modi government. Now, 70%, or in my estimation, of the key jobs in the Modi government have gone to people in this Mr. X's Darbar. Now, Mr. X is a wonderful person, a great human being. I met him a few times. I think he's a lovely human being and is a brilliant human being. But the reality of the situation is it was not to it was not to fulfill his policies that we all decided to support Narendra Modi, and and millions of people decided to vote for Mr. Modi. So when you have a team in which 70% of people represent an individual who may be a wonderful friend, a good human being, but who's very different from the kind of policy that you're talking about, then how are you going to be effective? So Modi has been hobbled with that kind of a team. In the bureaucracy, he took a decision that, okay, I'm going to go the Gujarat way. In Gujarat, he left most of the bureaucrats to themselves. Well, the reality is state bureaucrats, a lot of them have relatively little authority because so many things are centrally administered. In the central government, the bureaucrats have much more authority. You have to be much more careful in choosing the bureaucrats. What particularly worries me is the fact a lot of bureaucrats were chosen who were hand in glove with certain UPA ministers. I'm talking of high flying ministers. Whom I'm talking about. I'm talking of mining and metals ministers. I'm talking about resources ministers. I'm talking about ministers who are, experts in finance. And you know whom I'm talking about. And these people, all of them, many of them have done extremely well out of this last 10 years of Manmohan Singh. And they've done extremely well because certain bureaucrats helped them to navigate and to ensure that their special projects work and the projects of their friends got implemented. Now, this is not the kind of expertise that is needed in a Modi administration. So too many of the people, fixers, dalals, unfortunately, a lot of the fixers and dalals were senior members of the UPA were remained in place during this in this government. And I would also like to mention, till today, not even a single FIR has been filed against any UPA cabinet minister. Not even a single FIR. Forget about a prosecution, forget about going to jail. Not even an FIR has been filed. Now, Mr. Modi went for nearly 2 years talking about the corruption of the UPA and talking specifically about the corruption of XYZ minister. And his agencies have not been able in 4 years to even file an FIR against them. More importantly, how will it be done? Because the officials who he has retained in place are all complicit in these activities. So obviously they will protect the ministers, because if they don't protect the ministers, they themselves are in trouble. And many of them live very high lives. Many of them have got their children abroad, quite frankly. Some may be where you are. Some may be studying where I am now at the moment, Washington, D.C. They're doing exceptionally well out of life. And this is the reality of situation, Sri. Frankly, you can't expect first-rate results from a third-rate team, and this is what has happened. The Modi government, frankly, is not generating results of the caliber that we expect from Narendra Modi.
Now, I just want to pick on one thing that you mentioned. You said that Mr. X has a darbar, and probably you and I are mentioned quite frequently because we are all at once the biggest supporters of the Modi regime. At the same time, we also function as a responsible opposition. We are highlighting a lot of the things that need to be addressed, even crying details that need to be addressed. Now, my question to you, sir, further is the lack of action, lack of FIRs on the UPA ministers because of a certain individual interfering in them, or is it there's also, like you mentioned, that the bureaucracy also is playing a very active role in scuttling, slaying, and in staying things and so on and so forth. But at some point, surely Mr. Modi should have realized this is what is happening, isn't it? I mean, 4 years is a long time to realize what is going on.
Well, I'd like to say that so far Mr. X is concerned, recently there was a very happy event in his life, the marriage of one of his children. And I think I was about the only person in Delhi who didn't get an invite to any of the 19 big parties and galas that were held across the city to celebrate this very happy occasion. Of course, I mean, I would probably not have gone because I don't go to these galas. I avoid them. But I'm, of course, a little, if I may say so, uh, a little, I mean, I would just like to point out, I'm probably the only individual in Delhi who hasn't got an invite, who didn't get an invite to any of these 19 galas. So possibly for some odd reason, Mr. X may not be liking me very much. I don't know why, because he's always been very cordial when we very few occasions when we have met. And I have a lot of regard for this man. I think he's a wonderful human being, a great raconteur. And one thing I'll say about Mr. X, he is very loyal to his friends and he's very good to his friends. If you're a friend of Mr. X, the man will take care of you, he'll protect you, he will help you. And I know cases in which, friends of mine who are friends of his, they've had problems with health, they've had problems with education of children, they've had problems in their career. Mr. X has gone out of his way to help all of them. So I'd just like to say, I certainly am not someone who would like to knock down Mr. X. In fact, I have regard for him as a human being. I am not his friend, but those who are his friends, I would say, are lucky people because he's very good to his friends. Now, let me look. Let's be honest. The buck stops, as you correctly said, with one person. I don't think Mr. X chose himself to the jobs that he's held. I don't think he chose many of the, I mean, he chose a lot of people in the team, but eventually the final signature is not his. The final okay is not his. The final okay belongs to one man. And that is why today the huge opposition attack, it's not on Mr. X or Y or Z or A or B or C. It's on one man, Mr. Modi. Why? Because the buck stops with him and the final responsibility stops with him.
You bring up a very interesting point. Every time there has been talk of a reshuffle, the effect of that was actually a feeling of getting underwhelmed. I mean, the big four, which is where most of the action happens, have not been touched, except for one. Maybe one has been moving around a little bit, and really the way the portfolios have been assigned, I cannot really fathom what is the reason for these things. And this is almost on bordering on insanity, because if you're trying to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, that's the definition of insanity.
Well, actually, Sri, the point is that, I think Mr. Modi, I mean, I'll give you an example. He was very keen on last mile implementation in some of his ministries. So whom did he choose? For retired civil servants. So he hasn't gone beyond the civil service to civil society. You and I know India is a very vibrant civil society. In so many fields, civil society, frankly, is doing the jobs and paying the taxes and, frankly, somehow overcoming the mess that's been made by the civil service in the country. But Mr. Modi did not look beyond retired civil servants. Now, in the RTI, for example, RTI, Right to Information Panels, Manmohan Singh implemented the RTI and filled it with retired civil servants whose lifetime has been spent suppressing information. Nobody, the civil society was ignored. Is happening now. So, I mean, I'm rather underwhelmed by the difference. Where is the difference? I know there's a whole lot of, if I look at the television anchors, if I look at the television shows, there's a huge amount of difference. But if you look substantively, I'm not able to see enough difference to make me feel happy. And I'd like to say that I'm talking as someone who genuinely likes Mr. Modi. He's a man of the people. He comes from Vadnagar, a small village. He comes from a very humble family background. His family remains humble. I mean, he has not lifted a finger to help them, unlike almost every other politician who has made their families millionaires and billionaires. The Modi family is still where they are, and that speaks very well for them. It speaks well for the Prime Minister. But the reality of the situation, very frankly, Sri, is that today in this, as he's entering the fifth year of his term, I mean, the all over the world, people are asking that 4 years ago there was so much promise. What is the delivery?
It's a very famous question that's asked in American presidential debates, like, where's the beef? So it essentially means,
Don't talk about beef, by the way. Here we'll both get into trouble. Please. Don't talk about beef. I know that I'm in DC and beef is very, very popular, but back home, I mean, it's a capital offense.
That's true. That's true. Okay, now let's look forward. We have, say, 12 to 14 months left, and now the window for acting against some of these UPA ministers is closing rapidly, and there's an expectation of some imminent action. And yet, what seems to happen is, just when all the ducks seem to have lined up, somewhere something goes wrong, and the status quo prevails. Now, I don't know if that should also be, attributed to Mr. Modi, or if the system that has been created in the past is part of the reason for that.
See, Modi has been trying in his own way to make some changes. One thing he has done, a lot of people from different streams of administration have been integrated in the IAS today more than anybody else. But he hasn't touched civil society so far. That's the problem. And civil society is where the real talent and strength of the country is. And that's his weakness, actually, or the weakness of his government. It rests on the civil service. And the Indian civil service, frankly, has not distinguished itself over the last 70 years. I mean, you can say that the politicians are responsible. For God's sake, politicians are interested in about 5% of activity. 95% is firmly under the control of the civil servants.
I must disagree. I mean, I'm just piqued about what you just mentioned, Professor Nalapat. The Indian administrative services, this is the cream of the crop. I mean, people will not even go abroad. They'll give up that to be a part of the IAS. And that means the intelligence quotient that they bring to the table is rather high. So where is the disconnect? I'm just trying to understand where is the disconnect.
Sri, number one, the way of selection is the same selection that was carried out by the Chinese 2,000 years ago. A lot of it is the same selections carried out by the British about 200 and odd years ago, very frankly. Times have changed since then. And secondly, however brilliant you are not going to be a domain specialist in several of the key disciplines which are important in a country. For example, telecom. I mean, it's hard to be you're an expert on internet. I mean, it's taken you years of effort. A civil servant comes in from the agriculture ministry to the telecom ministry. I mean, how long is he going to take to master that? I can't believe he's going to take, anything less than 5 years. And in 2 years, he'll be gone to some other ministry. He'll go to defense. He'll go to home. And the reality is, in India, a man can come into defense ministry after a dozen other ministries, including fisheries, including sports, including women and child welfare. He can then come to defense. So look, this is a world which is a complex world. You need domain knowledge, you need domain expertise, and within our bureaucratic system, that's shunned. So-called domain specialists, domain experts, they come as consultants. In many other times, they're told what to do, what to write, and they write it. And they collect whatever thing, and then they go. But the reality is, very few actual domain specialists are integrated into the bureaucracy in India. Far fewer than practically any other country in the world.
You have a point. When the US government gets formed every 4 years, the president pretty much has carte blanche to pick and choose whoever he wants to appoint. Of course, the Senate and the Congress have to agree to the nomination. But by and large, he has the pick of whoever he wants to nominate. In fact, every time the Secretary of Treasury is a new person, you don't have the same thing. Whereas if you take a look at India, Indian politicians are there for life. I mean, you can never write them off, even if they have lost a prime ministerial election. Like, for example, if there was a ballot and they lost, they still continue to be around, somehow harboring hopes that in some strange way, somehow they will become this consensus candidate. I'm telling you how many prime ministers are still alive and they're still active in local politics now. There are a few.
Look,
So,
yeah,
so,
go
so the politicians themselves have to understand that there is a time when you have to say, I have to, hang up my boots and go. Whereas what you see in India is the opposite. They hang around themselves. They also want to bring their kith and kin into the show, right? And these people are even less accomplished, if you ask me, than their parents, because they're coming in because of a certain sense of entitlement, and that entitlement actually blinds their eyes and ears to some things. And when they see the adversity, they don't know how to react, and they tend to do odd sorts of things. Now, I guess we are both agreeing, but we are just going off of the thing here. So there is a problem with the polity itself, the body politic, the politicians that are there right now. They themselves need to introspect. Are we doing the best for our country? How many of them are willing to learn new things? I don't think any politician, even first of all, most of them have dodgy degrees. That's a different question. But so if you're not willing to learn new things, then how can you expect, or how do you know who's delivering what?
Shri, my point is very simple. The people of this country, civil society, let me again, they haven't got the luxury of being, of getting their income and their, and their logistics and their accommodation and their travel and everything else taken care of by the state. And irrespective of performance, they get a wonderful report on their confidential assessments. If you look at the confidential assessments of the IAS, every member of the IAS reaches the top. Every member of the IAS has got the kind of pension which the military is even now only dreaming about. And the reality of situation is that they have this kind of a life. Now, unfortunately, that is the reality of situation. Now, you compare that with actual performance, and you'll find there's absolutely no relationship between performance and coming up. And you can say politicians. The reality is politicians in India look, they talk big and act small. Now, we made a mistake in the beginning, in the sense of the early people who took charge. They retained the colonial law. Today, in the 21st century, we need far fewer regulations. The Indian is a creative mind. He's adult. He and she can be trusted. But even today, you're burdening the Indian with so many regulations that you're killing startups, you're killing the tech giants of the future, you're killing the industries of the future. Why? Because you and your bureaucracy and others are neck deep with the established players, established in the status period, established in the period of the status quo. And so the status quo is strangling the new shoots, the new people. In the 1990s, under Narasimha Rao, somehow you had an Infosys and a Wipro. I'm not sure you can, and any Infosys or Wipro can grow in today's climate. It's not going to happen. That's a sad reality. Whereas India can sustain 40 Infosys, 60 Wipros. So the point is, we need a freer system. Secondly, we're talking about beef. Frankly, yes. I'm a vegetarian. I don't think meat at all is desirable. But you can't impose that through the force of law. You can't impose prohibition, for example, in Bihar. This gentleman, Nitish Kumar, has done it, and he's clearly shown himself to be unfit to handle any responsibility because of that action. Because people are still drinking away, and the mafia is benefiting. So the only people who benefit in prohibition is the mafia. You have to have a free system. You can't talk of democracy as just casting your vote, and for the balance 364 days, the public have no freedom whatsoever. You have to give them freedom, and if you give the Indian freedom, if you give the Indian trust, the Indian will deliver. In the beginning, Modi did come like that, like your own signature is needed. But that soon petered out. The bureaucracy soon intervened. And today, I'm sorry to say, regulations are still stifling, and many of them have increased. I thought Kapil Sibal and Chidambaram were the last word in this kind of regulation. But today I find even more regulations. So this is, I'll give you an example. At 4 hours notice, you make 86% of the country's currency worthless. Without whom have you consulted? Whom have you talked to? You just make it worthless. Now there's a solemn covenant by the Reserve Bank governor on every banknote that he will that this banknote has got a particular value. You've broken that covenant. You've broken the trust that people have for the banking system. Now, what have you gained out of all this? Has terrorism gone down? Has black money gone down? Has counterfeiting gone down? Nothing has happened. So, I mean, but I'm told that all the top civil servants involved were enthusiastic supporters of demonetization. So I'm not going to blame Modi for demonetization. With every bureaucrat around him says, this is an excellent policy, sir. This is wonderful. This is a miracle. He went ahead and did it. So this is the quality of advice he's getting. The reality is we have a very inbred system in which they consult only each other, deal only with each other, and don't meet anybody except each other. This is the problem we have in this country, and you have to break out of that and get into civil society. And the point is, who's going to do it?
Now, I just want to put Professor Nalapat in NaMo's shoes today.
No, I wouldn't like to get into. I would not compare myself to him at all.
You don't like to be in hypotheticals?
No, NaMo is NaMo. He is sui generis, and no one can be anything like him. I have enormous regard for the man.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. It takes heavens to
But I can tell you, frankly, I think he assumed that he's going to have 3 terms, like in Gujarat. That's a dangerous assumption to make, very frankly. And I think he seems to have got the feeling that, okay, some of these reforms I can put to my 2nd term, some I can put to my 3rd term. I think that's a dangerous thing. I think you have to front load your reforms, front load your changes at the very beginning of your term, the first 18 months, the first 30 months.
See, that's what Trump did, right? I mean, Trump did that, and so did Obama in his first term.
So did Thatcher, so did Reagan.
Yes.
So did Putin. So did Xi Jinping.
So I guess the question that I was leading up to was, so Modi was a chief minister of a inherently business-friendly state. Let me put it that way. And then he gets the mantle of the prime minister because the rest of the country thinks that, okay, whatever he has achieved there, he should be able to replicate it across the country.
Precisely.
Now, when he assumed the reins there, he must have had some person as a sounding board to sound his ideas before he started implementing them. Did that happen, or is it not the way Modi functions?
I'll tell you frankly that the Prime Minister's office today is, it's like a castle where only a handful of people, frankly, have access to the castle. The key to access to it. So really, one can't say how he's functioning, whom he's functioning with, what kind of activities taking. I'm only judging by results, and the result of the situation is very simple. You had the UPA, frankly, 2008. There was a financial crash. You had very bad mismanagement, frankly, of Sonia Gandhi's economic policies. All that is a disaster. You had rampant corruption. With all that, you had a higher average rate of growth than we have in the last 2 or 3 years, when the world has grown much faster relative to that period, and oil prices have crashed. So ultimately, please judge by results. Don't act like some of these television anchors. You please judge by results, judge by hard facts. The hard fact is we're talking of 7%. I think there's been some change in the index and thing. I would say it may be 7%, but it feels like 4.5% or 5%, frankly. It's like, you can say let's say it's 15 degrees, but it feels like 10 degrees. So this is the point. We need 10 to 12 million jobs a year for social stability. We need 11 to 12% growth a year for social stability. We can't be rah-rahing about 7%, frankly. 7% is nothing. And even this 7%, frankly, has been calculated in a way which, in my view, is not entirely reliable.
Now, what you say makes perfect sense. I mean, you have the hard nose of figures, and ultimately results are what that matters. But from the way the parliament has been functioning, I'm just extrapolating that in a cabinet meeting also, there are not that many people who are expressing an alternate viewpoint. What about this? Did we think about this? Did we think about this? It almost looks like there's a line item that gets gone over, and then people just keep saying yes, 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 yes. Is that your perception too? I have not seen anything. I'm just making it purely based on how laws are getting passed in the parliament.
Well, I'd like to say that I have zero access to any of the deliberations of Mr. Modi's cabinet, so I really don't know what ministers are talking or what they're not talking or whatever. I do know that in public they all say that the government is doing exceptionally well, and they all, of course, are very laudatory of the prime minister. But that's the case in almost any cabinet of any prime minister. It's not just unique to the Modi government. So I really don't know how he's functioning. My only point is, very frankly, you have to understand that, okay, if you're chief minister of a state, you have, out of a total power of, say, 100%, a chief minister has got maybe 20% power. I mean, in the old days, 1950s, it may be 70%. It's fallen to 20% because of the complexity of society, our economic, foundations, and all that. The invigoration of the mind of the people. They become more relevant. They become more literate. For whatever reason, a prime minister will have about 15% power at a maximum, not more than that. You got to deal with foreign countries. You got to deal with the corporate sector. You got to deal with foreign companies. You got to deal with state governments. You got to deal with factions in the party. You got to deal with opposition parties. Frankly, 15% is too much. I think it should be 5%. The government has to downsize itself and its power. It's got to stop getting into people's faces. That should be the Modi revolution. There was some talk about removing laws. I mean, some of the laws that were removed, frankly, were laws that were never used for the last 50 years. Now, that's not removing a law. Remove major laws. For example, on criminal defamation.
That's accepting that the law is not implementable.
Exactly. So, criminal defamation, for example. It's a monstrosity to have criminal defamation in a democracy, but they're there. Look at that, the Information Technology Act. It's still a most draconian act. And how are you going to have a vibrant knowledge industry in India with an Information Technology Act where anybody can be sent to jail? Tomorrow I can tell you somebody can write a complaint against you and me on a postcard. And believe me, somewhere, some policeman somewhere can then, try and arrest us. It's so easy to arrest people in India. I think it will probably easier than in North Korea, if you ask me frankly. That is there. So this is the reality. This is what we expected Modi to change. This is what I firmly believe. The man is a pragmatic man. He's a practical man. He comes from that pragmatic background. And I expected him to change this. The only reason why I feel he's going slow on it is possibly he thought of a 3-term prime ministership, 15-year prime ministership, or a 12 or 13-year prime ministership at least. Said, okay, I'll do this in the 5th year, 6th year, 7th year, 8th year. Possibly that's a reason. But this is a well-intentioned man, and he's an outstanding intellect. So why was he so cautious, so hyper-cautious in these 4 years? This is the only explanation I can give that's logical.
So this is essentially what he had promised, right? Less government and more governance.
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
That's what you need. The country needs that. If you're going to break out of this 5%, 6% trap, you need freedom. The breakout is not going to happen because of the bureaucracy. The breakout is not going to happen because of the politicians. It will happen because of the overwhelming mass of civil society. It will happen when young people can be incentivized to produce startups. I'll give you an example of this angel tax, in which you're taxing people who are funding startups. What can be crazier than that? And now you've got a situation in which, okay, you're certified as a startup, so you don't get the angel. Again, you have to go to some bureaucrat, you have to crawl, and then you get the exemption. Look, we wanted Modi to avoid all that. You don't have to go to a bureaucrat, you don't have to crawl, but they're still all powerful.
Now, so I think this comes to the point that there appears to be still some sort of a zealous mode of collecting money from the salaried class. There's always what else can I get from this class? That seems to be the impression I get. And What I don't understand, this is a big picture thing. I just finished another talk, another hangout 2 3 days ago, where we talked about foreign exchange reserves, and where we said that India has been a net importer for God knows how many years. So really, India doesn't have any foreign exchange worth, mentioning, and yet we always talk about how our reserves are like, so many $1 billion and so on and so forth. My point of mentioning all this is that you there appears to be a certain fixation to try and keep charging or taxing the same set of individuals. This is how the middle class, that the salaried class that pays taxes feel, because most of the things Mr. Chidambaram ensured that would happen at the source, TDS, tax deduction at source, interest, even the interest that your bank account accrues, it first gets TDS, then whatever is remaining only comes in. So India can, think this thing a little bit differently, right? Why is it stuck on this path? I mean, Mr. Jaitley is doing the same thing that Chidambaram was doing.
Let's not blame Mr. Jaitley. I think, frankly, that Mr. Jaitley is more. Uh, I mean, he's being blamed for a lot of things in which I am quite certain he's not personally responsible. But I think, frankly, Jaitley has got a bad rap. Some of it is deserved, but a lot of it is undeserved. I'd like to be very, very clear about that. Look, if you take high school students and you get them to work on our imports and exports, it'll be so easy to find out because you can track world prices on Google. You don't have to track it any other way on your laptop on Google. Now you have a situation by which Indian exporters export at prices far below which the same commodity fetches in other markets. Obviously, it's clear they are, under invoicing. You have imports coming into the country at a far higher price than is paid by other people, other buyers of the same good. Now, you have situations in which, let's say, you export something, you have a resource, let's say, you export it to some entity, a paper entity in the Isle of Man, and in seconds, that re exports it somewhere at 40% the price. It's clear. I mean, you have this enforcement directorate, you have the DRI, you have the foreign trade ministry, you have the commerce ministry. For God's sake, a school child could tell you what is happening with over invoicing and under invoicing. And if you plug that loophole, if you get the top 50 over invoices and the top 50 under invoices and send them to prison, I can tell you that'll clean up the act of this country.
See, that itself seems to be a challenge. Sending somebody to prison, there seem to be, if people are taking anticipatory bail. And secondly, I think this is just my read, and I could be wrong, Professor Nalapat, that the right law is not being applied. I mean, there are violations in many ways. It seems like the way that is being applied, there could be a little bit more,
Well,
scrutiny on that. You use the right law to bring the guy into jail. Income tax levies, if you have an income tax finding, if you didn't pay income tax, that law, the guy can go to jail. That's how they should look at, rather than trying to go and take a route where this guy is stood up in front of a judge and then he gets a 2-day bail, and then they have to go and construct the case at that point. It seems like it's too time consuming.
look, when you have got agencies riddled by people who have been accomplices of the very people they are asked to arrest or to investigate, they know that if these guys remain arrested or if these guys investigate deeply, they themselves will be in trouble. So, first, you have to have a spring cleaning of your own agencies. You have to ensure that people who are facilitators, accessories to corruption are removed, especially in key agencies like the ED, CBI, etc., Finance Ministry, all these core ministries. You've got to do all that. You can't simply say, oh, they're all one big happy official family. I'm going to be, friendly to all of them. You can't do that. So the fact of the matter is, Sri, is that it's not rocket science, frankly. It can easily be done. But for that, you have to have the will to do it. And if you don't have the will, if you don't have the determination, if you don't have the inclination, it won't be done. My worry is the country doesn't have much time. If we continue this kind of low growth situation, we are going to have massive social unrest in the future. We are talking in terms of hate crime and all that. Look, all these hate crimes are taking place because our young people have nowhere to go. So they join these cow gangs and they join these beef gangs and they join some other gangs. And because they have nowhere else to go. The reality is you need 11, 12% growth. That is a priority for India. And if a government fails in that, that government has failed.
So I want to just wrap up this discussion by summarizing the thing. Let's say three things that Modi needs to do. I think you have already captured two. One is whatever it takes to ensure high growth of 11 to 12%. The second thing is less government and more governance. What would be the third thing that you would like to tell Mr. Modi?
I just like to say very, very clearly, be yourself. You're a practical man. You come from the grassroots. And please understand one thing, the poor want to become middle class and rich. They don't want to remain where they are. Please don't go the way of so many ministries in the past and talk in terms of, basically handouts and things like that. Please ensure, like the old thing about, teaching a man to fish rather than giving him a fish. That's what I would like to tell him. Create an ecosystem in which genuine growth can take place, initiative can flourish, and for heaven's sake, remove the dead hand of the bureaucracy from its joking control over the initiative and independence of the Indian people. We are a country which is supposed to have escaped colonialism, but retained the entire colonial structure of government and the entire colonial structure of law. And very importantly, this is the 21st century. Please don't talk in terms of removing of English, or don't talk in terms of controlling of diet, or don't talk in terms of controlling of lifestyle. All that is desirable. Do it through mass education, but don't use the force of law. Law should be used at a minimum. Law is something that should be used as a last resort. When you use it as a first resort, people become scofflaws. They lose respect for the law. And that is a very dangerous thing because it can lead to anarchy. We are 5 or 6 years away from anarchy if we don't cross the barrier into double digit growth. That is what I would like to tell Mr. Modi.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat. Mr. Modi, I hope you get a chance to see at least the excerpts of this conversation. Here are two well-wishing individuals. We have been first in the line to congratulate you on your accomplishments, and also the first to show shine the spotlight on some of the dark corners that need dusting. So this is really an unsolicited advice. But I hope that you see the merit in of our arguments. Thank you very much, Professor Nalapat, and we'll meet again one more on another hangout.
Thank you, Sri.